I want to start out by saying I love my wife, Alice. She's always been nothing but the best to me, but she's always had trouble falling asleep. She's tried all the standard methods, medication, sleep time teas, etc. I never really have the same issues. I always fall asleep quickly and she tries not to keep me up. She's always been so caring about keeping me rested. Recently, I've been a bit stressed at work, and as a result, falling asleep is a bit more difficult these days. Now, I think she needs more help than I initially thought. As I tossed and turned a few nights ago, my brain wasn't quite asleep. I could hear Alice's breathing. Her breathing was so fast and quiet, but loud enough to keep me awake. It was very unsettling. So I reached behind me and shook her awake to make sure everything was alright. She drowsily said, "Yes, baby, I just can't stay asleep." I assumed maybe she was coming in and out of a wild dream, and I fell asleep again. The next day, as we ate breakfast, I asked her what she had dreamt about. She was totally clueless. What do you mean?" Alice said. "Last night, you sounded like a choking toddler all night long until I woke you up. Were you having a nightmare?" She made a confused face at me and laughed as she told me she had no clue what I was talking about and that I didn't wake her up. Her laugh comforts me, and she seemed fine, and forgetting dreams is very common. After all, I don't recall almost any dreams I have. I kissed her on the head and went to work, and I didn't think about it for the rest of the day. The next night, I decided to stay up a bit to make sure she fell asleep. The same thing happened. They were sharp, labored breaths. They weren't loud, just hardly audible, but audible nonetheless. I didn't wake her up for a while, just to see if it would pass. It didn't. Hours and hours of ridiculous panting. Eventually, I just couldn't ignore it, and I shook her awake and told her she was doing it again. She apologized and turned over to me and fell asleep. So I did too. No breathing this time. The next morning, I asked her, concerned about the breathing again, and explained how it went on for what seemed like the entire night. Again, she told me she didn't remember. I started to grow worried. On my way back from work, I stopped by my local convenience store and picked up some sleep aid medicine, hoping she would just take some and just knock out. She lovingly agreed and took a standard dose. We watched the news as we ate dinner until she fell asleep on the couch. She was out cold. I picked her up and carried her to our room and tucked her in. I got in bed shortly after. I jolted awake and checked my alarm clock. 4:23 a.m. I was awakened by the breathing again. This time, right on my neck. They were these deep, frantic, panting breaths, like a dog after chasing a ball. I rolled over to check on her. She was staring at me. Her eyes wide as a dinner plate, and her mouth fully open, her jaw nearly unhinged. Instinctively, I let out a scream, and she began screaming back like I had never heard. My screams quickly ceased as hers continued, full volume, horror movie screeching at me as I lied next to her. For a few seconds, I just looked at her as she screamed. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought this had been a nightmare. It was not. I shook her for what felt like hours, begging her to wake up. She couldn't stop howling at me as if she had never been in more pain. I could hear her jaw cracking from how aggressively she was holding her mouth open. I was so terrified, I ran out of the bedroom and called 911. I told the dispatcher what happened, and suddenly, her screams stopped. I sprinted back into the bedroom and she was asleep again. Obviously, I couldn't sleep after this, so I sat and watched her lie there until an ambulance arrived. The paramedics woke her up and she seemed so confused. She said she had been asleep all night. They told me she likely had night terrors. They didn't seem to understand the extent of the situation. I reluctantly agreed, but this was out of the ordinary. She never remembered any of these events, and to me, she seemed clearly awake. As I said, I love my sweet wife Alice so much, but I felt scared of her for the first time ever. I don't think she could harm me. She's very short and petite, and I'm 6'3" and certainly not petite. At first, I was more worried for her safety, but I don't feel safe anymore. After those last few sleepless nights, I concluded that I really needed some rest, and I told her that I'd get in bed with her after I finished watching the news. And she went to bed. I knew it was time to try to get some sleep, but I just couldn't. That face was seared into my brain. She was just screaming so loudly, staring at me. It was the sort of thing that you only see in a horror movie. It wouldn't leave my mind. I'm a skeptical person, so I don't believe in any of that sort of thing, but this was so wrong. How do I get past that? I decided to just talk to her about this rationally. I walked to the bedroom, planning to wake her up and try to discuss our options. I couldn't live that way. I walked in, only to see the empty bed. Our bathroom light was on. I peeked through a crack in the door, and I'm still not sure why I saw what I saw. She stood in the mirror, making that same face, clawing at her reflection. I didn't see her for too long, but I didn't see her blink. It was absolutely inhuman. I slowly backed out of our room, quietly shut the door and sat on the couch, staring at the door. I felt like prey in my own household. As I sat, wide awake, I had a thought that gave me goosebumps all over my body. I had only recently noticed this. I've always slept deeply, as I feel very comfortable with her. Has she been this way the entire time? We have been married for almost a decade. Has she just stared at me, mouth agape, panting as I slept every night for years? Does she just go and stare at herself in the bathroom, making this horrific face? About half an hour later, I slowly crept back to the bedroom, then to the bathroom. I peeked again, and she hadn't moved an inch, still clawing at her reflection, gutturally gasping. I quietly knock and ask, "Alice, are you okay in there?" She answered, "Yes, honey, I'll be to bed soon." I peeked back in, and she was wiping her face with a skincare wipe. Regular Alice. I'm in bed right now as I'm writing this post, facing away from her. I felt her cold body slink under the blankets behind me. I've been fake sleeping for a while now. I'm typing this under the blankets. She definitely thinks I'm asleep. I can feel her warm breath against the back of my neck. I can hear the soft cracking of her jaw. I'm growing desperate. I can't look at her. Has this sort of thing happened to any of you? If I ignore this behavior, will I be safe? Am I safe? I just want to be okay. I'm going to try to sleep. Good night, everyone. Hopefully tomorrow I wake up and see some advice. Good night.